Today we're taking those store-bought t-shirts and we're gonna make them fit. We're gonna take it from this to this, or maybe just from this to this. When you have a tried and true t-shirt pattern, use it to make t-shirts that you love. Besides using it to make different styles, you can use it to retrofit your favorite store-bought t-shirts so that it's something you want to wear. So get that favorite t-shirt you've always wanted to wear out and your favorite t-shirt pattern, and let's retrofit. When you're trying to buy a shirt, and it's really hard sometimes to pick a shirt that's going to fit you, especially if it's a unisex, I always suggest picking something that is going to fit your largest circumference, whether it's your bust or your hip. That way you're going to have some room to work with. And then you can also use your favorite t-shirt pattern to cut it down to fit you so that there's no armhole gaping or whatever it is. Like if you have that one t-shirt you fit, why not buy a shirt large enough to cut it down to size? And sometimes we just don't have very many options. When you're looking at that size chart, usually they're gonna give you a measurement that is measuring from side seam to side seam, and it'll say something like 22 inches, but you double that and you'll know that it's a 44-inch circumference. You might not know if it has side seams or not, but that's not going to matter at all because you can add side seams if you need to. You'll also know that that's a straight measurement from bust to hem. There's going to be no shaping unless they give you different measurements for your bust and your hip, which mostly it's going to be unisex, so there's not much difference. There's lots of different things that you can do with your shirt. If it's really large and you have room to cut down on the sides to kind of shape it to you, that's great. But if you don't, you may have to leave this untouched. Whatever method you use, just be really flexible and bear that in mind. It's okay that you can't do all of the things you can, but it's going to improve it a lot. Usually I find that if I shorten it and change the armhole and shoulder, it's going to hang so much nicer. I'm fine with leaving some of the sleeve on the shirt to kind of capture the shape over here if I need it, because I need more, maybe more bust shape, and I'll show you what I mean. So sometimes what I'm going to do is, once I figure out my center, I'm going to line up the center of my favorite t-shirt, and you can kind of see that this little corner is landing in the sleeve. Now, I'm wearing a shirt like that right now where there is a part of the sleeve, original sleeve, on the body of the shirt, and no one's going to notice that. It's in my armpit, and it's really improved the fit of the shirt. So I don't care. I leave that little seam there, and I just think of this as all fabric, not concerned about the seams at all. So my first step is to get my shirt as flat as possible. Now there's two ways to go about this. I'm going to show you with the shirt flat on the table like this, with the front on top of the back. But if you know you're going to be cutting down your shirt a lot, like along the side seam here, what I would do is cut your underarm and side seam off, or take it out if you want with the seam ripper. But if you're cutting it off, don't worry about that. Just make a cut and then pull it apart so that it's only connected at the shoulders, because then you can just make one cut and it'll be symmetrical. Now, if you want to put shoulder shaping, you can take it out. You can take off everything. You can cut everything off if you want. I try and keep some of the original shirt integrity, but like on this one here, the rib neck was so high up that I just cut it off and hemmed it, and that was fine with me. Sometimes you can kind of keep some of the elements and sometimes you can't. Now I'm going to do this flat because I'm not going to cut this down very much, and if I do, I'll just flip my pattern piece over. I've already started pinning and finding the center. So I'll measure across and find the center, and I have a pin right here and I have a pin right here, so I just need a few. Some of these knits are super cheap and they aren't very well made, so they're going to torque, and you can kind of pull against it opposite to sort of try and straighten it out and block it. Look, if it's really bad, especially ones with side seams and the side seam just looks like it's torquing, if you're going to cut it off, great, right? You're going to put it to right. But if you're not, just let it do its thing and just ignore it. We're still going to get this shirt fitting way better than it did before, because they vary in degree of quality. So now I'm just going to measure straight across the neck here, and I'm just looking for a center. So it's about right here. And I'm just looking, like I said, I'm just looking for a center. I've taken my favorite knit pattern that I made. It's pretty tattered. This is my center line right here along this edge here. And I've taped my shoulder seam together. This is really important to get this right. And it's because you don't know where they put their shoulder seam, so we're gonna ignore that. We're gonna pretend like our shoulder seam is sewn together already on our pattern piece. Oh, and then you need to line it up here at the underarm, right here. Not perfectly, like, but you can kind of see that I have my centers parallel to one another. They may stack one on top of the other, but maybe they don't. Like my front is wider than my back, so it's parallel. And then I gently crease this. Now it may torque a little bit. That's okay. We're not going for perfection here. And then I stack my underarms at the same level. Like I said, the back may be narrower or wider than your front, and that's okay. We're just looking for, pretending like we've got this nice little shoulder armhole combo here. And I'll just pin mine together here so it stays like that. And then I'm gonna pull this around and make sure my centers are as parallel as I can make them. So now it'll stay stable for the most part like this. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna touch 2 points. We're gonna touch the shoulder juncture here to the wherever it hits on this line here at the shoulder, and our center line we're gonna put right on the center line of the shirt. That's something you can line right up on the center. I'm doing the front here. So I'm putting the front on here, lining it up there, and then I'm letting the shoulder line hit. And remember, my seam allowance makes that point about right here, and we're gonna hit that shoulder point, just like that. Just something in the ballpark. So now we can see my t-shirt is wider than this one, like my t-shirt pattern is wider, so I'm pretty much not gonna change the circumference of this. I definitely don't want it to be smaller. The shirt I'm wearing right now was cut perfectly out of my t-shirt pattern because I really wanted it to fit good. My shirt is a lot longer here. You can see it's kind of hanging off the table here. It's a couple inches longer, so that's one thing I can improve. And now what I'm gonna do is now I need to decide, do I wanna keep the original crew neck or do I wanna scoop? This is a shirt I just do like chores in and work around the house in, but I like it. It's something, you know, I went on a date with my husband to his favorite soccer team, and it was kind of a really fun weekend. So I still want the shirt, and that's why I wanna make it fit nicer. Now I'm going to chalk on my front armhole to the front, and look, my armhole is going to go up onto the sleeve, and that's okay with me. I think I will cut down the neckline because this is pretty high. It goes right up, and I don't really like necklines like that. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna chalk my neckline on here, and if I can, I use my hero marker, and we'll just draw it right on there. So now for this shoulder armhole area, ideally, I'm gonna be able to use my exact same sleeve. And so now I'm gonna start looking to see how likely that is, because what I can do is lay this on here and go, all right, can I get my sleeve on here? And ideally, this is going to land under this seam here. So it's going to, I can be able to cut it like that. So if I want a shorter sleeve, I could. Otherwise, I'm going to have to allow for some of the seam on the sleeve, and I'm not really down for that. So I think I'll just go for a slightly shorter sleeve. And remember, it's already hemmed, so my sleeve, this one here, isn't. So that already buys me some length. So I think I can get a sleeve that's about 1 inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch shorter. And that's very tolerable for me. So if I line this up on my center, and we are trying to hit that point there, because that's where this is hanging from your shoulders. You can kind of see that we have this little bit right here between this line and the top there, about 1/2 inch or so. And if I want to use this sleeve and this armhole, I have to make sure that this armhole is going to match this one. So that means I may need to change the angle of the shoulder. Otherwise, I'm doing something like this by pulling up the shirt like this. And that means that up here, the angle might be a little bit wrong for my shoulders. So that's just one thing. It seems like a lot of work, but once you cut these pieces out, this sews together really well, especially if you're using a lot of the elements that are already existing on your shirt. And I'm not a big fan of rib knit neckline, so I just hem it, which makes it really fast. Make sure we have our armhole here, and we'll mark our armhole there. And we have this and this. So let's draw this with chalk, something like that. And now we have this side pretty much set. So now over here, what's gonna happen here is I'm going to have to, I have seam allowance on this edge here, but this is a seam, so we need to make sure that we sync up with this. And remember, there's no side seam on this, so it's gonna be a little bit awkward, more like a dart from here to here. And that's fine, it's my underarm, it's not a big deal. All right, so now we have our front here, and we'll do our other front. Okay. All right, let me use my hair marker line to do that front neck. And I think I'll fold this and cut the rest of the front neck. So now we're going to repeat for the back, and we're being mindful of landing our shoulder line and this point here so that they're going to sew together, because remember our side seams are sort of fixed. And I'm also going to draw on my hem. All right, so now I'm going to repeat for the back, and then I'm going to show you how I'm going to cut this. Okay, so I'm going to pick up each layer and cut them individually. Blend this in. And now I'll start doing things like truing it up, making things as symmetrical as I can. I don't have a side seam, so it makes it a little tricky, but I can stack this underarm juncture up. My back is much higher in the front. That's a fitting issue that I need for t-shirts. Up here, we're gonna kind of look at how these corners are stacking up, and they look like they're at the same height as one another. So that's great. And I'm gonna just start cutting right here at the underarm and then get one layer. Now sometimes there's a binding right here on the inside, and that's kind of nice to utilize because this seam's gonna look a little messy since we're trying to blend it into that one. If you're using the existing neckband. If you're not using the existing neckband, you're cutting the neckline off like I am, then you really could just cut the whole shoulder off and it's fine. But we're gonna be careful around that. The best way to do these shirts is when you get to basically just deconstruct it or just cut out your shirt on top of it if it's large enough. And when it's like this, it's a little trickier. You can see that torque of the t-shirt really doesn't want to behave sometimes. That's why I just say just let it go, because your shirt's still going to be so much better than it was before. I'm going to just cut this off so we can get this piece off here. And then let's cut this sleeve off, but we're going to keep the integrity of the band on the inside, just in case you want it, that little piece of binding. So we'll just cut down here and cut it off. And then that way you have it just in case you want it. Okay, so now let's continue cutting on our other side here. We'll cut down, save this band. I think this one I need to reshape a little bit. Okay, we have our sleeves, so we need our sleeves. And now I can finish my neckline in the front. All right, and so now we're just gonna look it over and make sure everything's looking like it's sewable, that our seams are gonna match. This will be the weirdest part right here, the underarm. If you have a side seam, then you can kind of sink up to that side seam. But here we're gonna have a weird little jog. And so it'll be more like a dart. And we just don't wanna get any torquing or anything like that. So we'll just do our best there. And if it's a little bit off, that's okay. We'll just smooth it out. It's knit, which is great. And so yeah, right there, we'll just sew that dart right there. And this one we can trim down a little bit. All right, so now let's check our side seam here. So that fold line is the side seam, kind of, you know, it might be a little bit off, but we can kind of see we're pretty close there. That works. And then I don't think I'm worried about our shoulder seam at all, because it's still intact as well. And if we just take this off right here, which is pretty easy to take out because it's just straight stitches, sometimes it's a chain stitch, like this one's a chain stitch, then you'll just have that little piece of binding and you can do your shoulder seam as one little seam. I like the binding just because it's a nice little touch, but honestly, you know, you could just remove it and get rid of it. This side looks pretty good too. So what I would do when I do this dart is basically like 0 here to a seam allowance up here. And then that way, it's kind of like a dart, but it's not actually a dart. It's just we're sewing it, and it's going to resemble one because there's no seam allowance down here, but we have seam allowance up here. And we don't want to just go straight with our seam allowance here, stop. We'd have a jog, right? We got to blend it in. So now we have the body here. I just need to remove these. Then, you know, just sew this up. Like you can use a single needle or a serger. But I just need to sew this in the shoulders. And then I'll also have a hem to sew as well. So now let's look at our sleeves. The sleeves will be the tricky part on this particular shirt because I barely had enough. And before I cut on the underarm, I'm just going to kind of take a gander at how it's going to fit on here. My sleeve has a pretty forward shoulder here. So right, we're going to put it down here. And it's going to be about, it's not going to be that much shorter because this right here is my hem. So that's not bad. That's great. And so because the circumference of my sleeve is smaller, we can cut this apart and then cut this flat, which we love. All right, so we have 1, we have 2. I'm going to put these right sides together. And we'll get as much as possible. Let's see if we're going to line up here. Yeah, that'll work. Okay, so leave that there. And then we'll just cut out. I only have a front notch and a cap notch. That's all I need. And then there we go. There we have our sleeves. And then the way I would sew these together is, because it's already hemmed, I would sew these right sides together. So that. And then I usually take that seam allowance, push it to the front, not the back, so I can offset it from the underarm seam. But this one doesn't have an underarm seam, so it actually could be pushed towards the back. And then from the right side, I top stitch it down so it's nice and flat. So I don't have this like seam allowance going through the hem, which I'm not a big fan of. So that's the way I get around that. So now we have our sleeves, we have our shirt, and we're ready to sew these together. All right, we're part of the way through the sewing, so I thought I'd show you where we're at. So you can see here is my kind of dart side seam where I blended in, but if you have a real side seam, that's even better. You can blend in a little more naturally than I did. And here is our part of our old sleeve that it looks like a gusset, but it's not a gusset. It's not acting like a gusset. It's really just filling in the missing piece of our bodice here, right? We're looking at it upside down. And then this was what it looks like on the right side here. And I have sewn my sleeves together, and I like to tuck the tail in and then top stitch it down. When I have to sew through the hem like this, when I don't get to do the hem in the round, this is what I do to flatten it out. Lastly, we're at the shoulder. So this is my last step before I reattach the sleeve, and I've removed one band, and I thought I'd show you how I did that. This has a chain stitch, so if you're lucky enough to find the little chain and grab it, it's pretty easy to remove. So I'll show you what that looks like. So on the right side, you can see these are chain stitches. They're pretty chunky. And it usually takes a couple tries to figure out, you know, which direction is the chain stitch. So if I get a thread, I sort of unpick a bit and I pick it down close to the fabric. And then when I see that I have something sort of to grab, I kind of test it. And I don't think this one is the right end because nothing's really grabbing and letting me pull. So we'll try this side. And there it is. And so we'll do this one. If you can't find it, this is a pretty easy stitch to unpick, and it's not very long. And then on this side, it just looked like straight stitches, but it should just lift off now. And then I'll pull these off like that. So now we have our shoulder binding to reuse. And now we just need to true up this shoulder here. So I'm going to match my two shoulders that I plan to sew together like this. And my goal is to go from here to here, because remember, this is the seam line. So inside here, that's the seam line. It's a very tiny seam allowance, you know. So right here, that's the seam line, and here is my seam line, because remember I cut this with the pattern piece. It has 3/8 of an inch seam. So that's really what you're looking at. So let's just draw it on there so we can see it very visually. Line up our shoulders. And remember, if this right here is my seam juncture. We're connecting the dots. And so then you would want to trim parallel to that for your seam allowance. Now, I can't get my serger to sew that narrow. It's not that kind of serger. So we just do our best. And quite honestly, because I have this binding, I can just use a straight stitch here and then put this back on the garment. That makes it a little easier. You can sew a lot of this with a straight stitch. I did on the underarm as well, since it was just a few inches, and it's a lot easier for me to maneuver. And the serger would just be too big and chunky of a seam for that little tiny stretch where I'm trying to blend to nothing. And you can also use a zigzag too. There we go. So now I'm just going to sew this with my straight stitch machine at kind of a longer stitch length. It'll be fine. And then I'll straddle this over and sew it on there to kind of hide all that in there. And then we can just serge our sleeve on and we're good to go. And then, oh, I still need to hem my shirt as well. All right, we're done with our t-shirt retrofit. So I thought I'd show you, I just hem my neckline. I hemmed my bottom here. We have our underarms. Then here is the shoulder band. So it hides that straight stitched seam. And I don't get it centered perfectly, but I just don't care. Like, this is just a t-shirt. And yeah, I think this turned out really great. I can't wait to try it on. All right, well, I finished my quick t-shirt overhaul and it's just so much more comfortable now. I probably could have not made the neck my typical depth because of the little logo that cut through, but I got most of it. And you can see that the underarm doesn't really show, you know. And it's just a more usable t-shirt. And I only work in the yard in this t-shirt, but it still makes it more comfortable. So I hope you have fun kind of retrofitting some of your t-shirts, making them more wearable, avoiding the dreaded baggy armhole, crease above the bust, and the hanging up on the hips. And hopefully you get more wear out of some of those favorite t-shirts you have.